Your think tank, which is Para Medina Institute,
Yeah.
right? So SEPTA will, of course, you can describe your own think tank in your own words. What is the think tank doing? How? What is it mostly known for? Can you describe it in, let's say, one line, like
One sentence, maybe?
one sentence, like what it is mostly known for? Doing what kind of work?
Paramedian Public Policy Institute is a university as a think tank that concern on economic policy, and investment, and education, especially the employment of technology in education.
Technology and education.
Yeah.
And what are kind of positions the think tank has taken in recent years? Can you think of any major policy recommendation, anything which the think tank stood for?
Yeah. We are currently working on the issue of regional income.
Regional income.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, municipalities.
Okay.
We help them to increase their income by providing the formulation for that.
Right. Can we have another example? How would you like to describe your think tank institute?
Like what we do.
Like what is the think tank known for? So, for instance, Paramedina is known for work on education, some economic policy work. What is your institute mostly known for?
Our work is focused on research-based policy, and we focus on different areas like public financing, resource management. But we are not getting a topic like the whole issue in
Okay. Right. So can we say with same? I mean, of course, you are part of the team. You are part of the think tank. You are part of the institute. But can we say the same thing about others knowing us? So for instance, you described about the work which you are doing from an inside perspective. But what is the outside perspective of a think tank? How do others view your work? Can be audience, can be stakeholders, can be government, can be other think tanks, and normally there should be in one line, in sync. Like, so what are you doing? So ideas is standing for institutional reforms, anti-corruption efforts, more open economy, lesser role of the government in the business, blah blah blah. But then, is it also what you are known for by your audience? What is the image and perception they have about you? What kind of work you are doing? What kind of positions you are holding? And is it the same? So if it is the same, then you're very successful in terms of communicating the basic message of the organization and of the projects which you are involved. But it's not always easy to say that others also assume about us the same way that we think about ourselves. So again, I'll be giving, of course, examples from ideas, but I encourage also the examples from your respective institutes. for a long time, for at least first 9 years or 8 years of Ideas existence, Ideas was always known as an opposition think tank. Although we had this, as I mentioned in the beginning, cross-partisan representation in the board, and that was meaningful representation. It was not just token, symbolic. People knew it. But then it was also known that, let's say in the government circles, that previous government circle, the government got changed last year, as you will probably be aware, after 61 years. It was an opposition think tank. So that's not very helpful perception, especially when you are claiming that you are a policy think tank and you want to access policy, you want to access the government. Because imagine an opposition think tank walking into the government office and saying for some kind of, asking for some kind of recommendation. And if the receiving party perceives you as this is coming from the opposition, it's not a very helpful projection. So this is what we call positioning. So positioning and strategic positioning means that what kind of perception you have about your think tank. Right? So what others are thinking about you. It is this is a business term, so it is also a mind share in other people's mind. What kind of think tank you are. Also, in Malaysia, it's largely like vast majority Muslim population, conservative outlook, and so therefore some words can be very problematic here. One word which Ideas has been always associated is the word liberal. So what is this word liberal? We talk about mostly in economic sense, economic liberalization, but there's also cultural liberty, social liberty, individual liberty, religious liberties. All those kind of associations comes with it, and we have struggled with it, to be honest. That although we have not worked on the cultural issues of liberty, for instance, the LGBT rights, we have never worked on this issue as an organization. We have mostly worked on economic liberal ideas. But if you, and I have experienced this many times when I talk to people in the government, in media sometimes. Oh, you are a very liberal organization. And when I ask, oh, what do you mean by you're very liberal? Oh, you are talking about LGBT all the times. What? Really? We have never done any project on LGBT rights. Nothing wrong with it, but as a matter of fact, we have not done a project on that. Why this association and why this positioning, why this perception comes up? And and when you're talking about economic liberal ideas, then of course you're talking about open trade, let's go to the government, etc., etc. But then, if you are tagged as a liberal organization in this country, we have not been marked officially, but there are certain organizations in the government departments which have marked certain groups as liberal, and that is considered a deviant group. And that's not very helpful, especially when we are talking about if you are involved in public education campaigns. So if you're involved in, I would say, policy work, maybe you can live with it. But if a lot of your work involves public messages, public communication, reaching out to members, grassroots at grassroots level, and then you are having an association which is not largely acceptable to the public, then the effectiveness of your message is reduced. So what is important is that we are aware of of our positioning, our perception?
It's a difficult one. I mean,
Yeah.
perception is a fascinating. I mean, we are sometimes deemed, oh, a right-wing organization. We're a left-wing organization.
Yeah.
We're an opposition organization.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very perceptional, and liberal is at the core of a lot of that, because liberal is freedom to invest, to make money.
Yeah.
It's freedom to think. And I shouldn't sort of interrupt here, but you know, it reminded me of a former director of ours, and he attended a conference in Melbourne, and Milton Friedman, a fairly conservative or liberal economist from Chicago, gave a talk, and it was a Chamber of Commerce type meeting, and all these businessmen were there, and he said, look, we've got to free up the private sector, give opportunities to operate, get the government off people's backs so that they, so stop these impediments to business. And there was a big round of applause, and then he said, stop this interference and all these subsidies and things like this. And the room went a bit silent. And this guy said he was in the lift afterwards, and he heard these businessmen say, we've never attended a talk by a communist before. From their perspective, yes, government taxing and this, that, and the other, and regulations was a pain in the neck, but subsidies, or monopolies, well, that's what some of them thrived off. Yeah. So that man who was going to interfere with that was obviously something else, and therefore he was labelled something they didn't like.
Yeah.
So, perception.
Interesting. Milton Friedman as communist.
Yeah.
Wow. I wonder if that can ever be imagined, but that happens, and that's not an easy thing to manage. And therefore, I think in terms of the questions, when we want to do our positioning, this is more about how to manage your position and how to manage the perceptions about you. Where do you start from? And one way of looking at this exercise is let's have analysis of the external environment. What kind of the positions are there? So Paul mentioned about left wing and right wing, and so what do the people perceive about these ideas? Very importantly, to understand, do we take a position on, let's say, on democracy, on religion, or economy? What is that position that we think as a think tank we take? Because ultimately, it's about forming public opinion. It's about influencing policies, right? So whenever we're talking about policies or public opinion, then we are talking, even not sometimes explicitly, we are talking about certain positions that we ascribe to. And so what is our position? And then where do we want to take us as an organization when talking about the external environment? And which audience are we addressing in terms of our positioning? This is again a difficult question, I think. Right? Some would use the word ideology for it. I prefer the word worldview, although they come with a sort of some overlapping meaning. Should a think tank have a worldview? How many think tanks which are present here can say, oh, we have a sort of either an ideology of any kind or a worldview? Can we say that? Do we have it? Like this bigger understanding of the world, how the world should be.
How the world should be?
Yeah. How the world should be? what should be the economic system, let's say, to make it more simple, because how should be the political organization of a society, should be a democracy, what kind of democracy, should there be greater role of the government, less role of the government. So this is the worldview I'm simplifying it.
We're thinking
Do you
more-
have it?
Actually,
VEBR.
not sure. But we're thinking more about how Vietnam should be rather than how
Yes.
the world should be.
So this is your worldview, right? So can you explain that? Can you explain how do you like to see Vietnam? What is your
Yeah, sure. Because of
oh, that's it. Will this work?
yeah, it works.
Okay.
So the question for us
Thank you.
is how Vietnam should be, in this world, but we based on an ideology. As a think tank on economic, we advocate the rules of law and the free markets economy. That's why we do research and analysis on almost on macroeconomic to ultimately give recommendations and advices to
Yeah.
policymakers. Yeah, how to make decisions better, how to promote freedom, how to promote market economy in Vietnam.
Okay.
Yes.
So you have a particular direction and a clear sort of policy thrust in terms of economy. That's very
Yes.
helpful.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Okay. We'll come to later the sort of implications of having a worldview, but I just as a first step. Any other example? Okay. Yes, Uma.
Yes, Ali. I think in terms of the worldview, yes, it is. Yes, we have, but at the same time, we also have challenging issue. So, for example, in terms of democracy, market liberalization, and then how to set up good governance in Indonesia, yes, we totally support for that, especially after the authoritarian era, after Suharto era. But at the same time, we also experiencing kind of dilemma. For example, when we talk about market liberalization, at the same time, our government also conducted what we call as nationalist approach in their economic strategy. Maybe to some extent quite similar with what happened in Malaysia, what has been conducted by Tun Mahathir. How to open our market, but at the same time we also have to support for local players, especially the state enterprise companies. So to some extent we try to campaign our position. We are in this position, but at the same time we also face something like irony. But we also agree with that argument. We have to support for local players, otherwise they will be beaten or weakened by the global players within the a very competitive market system.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's why yes, we have. And in terms of liberal, our institution, Paramadina Public Policy Institute, we also indirectly experience something unique, because this institution, University of Paramadina, has been established by a very well-known Islamic thinker. His name is Professor Nur Khalis Majid, who was widely acknowledged as quote-by-quote liberal Islamic thinkers. In terms of economy and political issue, liberal is not really sensitive, but in terms of Islamic Islamic discourse. This, to some extent, for Malay society, for Indonesian society, this could be a bit sensitive. So some stakeholders, quote by quote, accuse Paramadina as part of the liberal, which is very problematic for some conservative Muslim society. But at the same time, we also try to balance between, we're working on this issue, which is actually not related to that accusation, but still the accusation targeting us for that. But personally, I'm not really. It's not a big deal for us, but we still experience that issue.
Yeah, a question on that exact point, because one thing I was going to ask Ali is how do you distinguish positioning versus branding and marketing in a country like Indonesia, where Paramadina does have a worldview. I mean, it's a market-oriented worldview. Those are the policies that you research and that you advocate for. But in a country like Indonesia, where again, you said it yourself, you cautioned that yes, while Paramadina is market-oriented, we still support local players. I mean, we're not total, use a French term, laissez-faire, of just allow the market to do what it does. How does Paramadina walk that very fine line between being economically liberal, pro-market, pro-private enterprise, without being too much? Because then you'll lose credibility, because you're not going to stop the food subsidies and the fuel. I mean, they're too politically popular. You know, you could call it an 80-20 issue. 80% of the population supports it, 20% are opposed. You never want to be on the wrong side of an 80-20 issue. So how do you walk that line in terms of branding, of making sure that while you're being true to your position, your brand isn't such where you cost yourself credibility? How do you manage that?
That's a very difficult question, John. I mean, we try to to be in the middle within the complex discourse. For example, in terms of business integrity issue, we try to promote how the business players can be more transparent and then having integrity. I mean, private integrity, because currently Indonesian Corruption Eradication Commission try to target not only public corruption but also private corruption, and this is the new phase for Indonesian governance issue. But at the same time, when we experience there is, for example, what we have been conducted with SAIP in terms of the Chinese investment in Indonesia. If there's something alarming situation where the local players getting weaker or maybe hijacked by vested interests, who has been represented by local elites or national elites in Indonesia, we try to speak critically on that issue. So that's very difficult to position our institution in that discourse. It's very complex discourse, but we still try to do our best. Which one we have to be critical, and in what position we have to be supportive. For example, in democratic issue, that's also the same thing. We 100% supporting democracy, but at the same time, after we conducting decentralization political system in Indonesia, we experience there are so many side effects of this situation. It means decentralization means decentralized corruption, and we experience that situation day by day. So to some extent, we try to be critical. This is the situation. This is the real condition in local government. But we also try to support. You have to do this. You have to do this. What my colleague, explained about the local income. We try to provide advocacy. Even though to some extent we also realize that I'm not really sure whether they will do the best thing to deal with this problem. But this part of the reality in our society. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is important to. I think John was mentioning let's say the difference between branding and positioning. And I would say that in terms of our the branding is. Can you hear me right?
Yep.
The branding is more of the formal exercise which an organization is doing on its own. So branding comes in terms of our statements, media statements. Branding comes in terms of how we describe a project. Which lines do we describe to summarize the work of a research? This is all branding which organization is doing. But the positioning is about the perceptions which are being created as a result of that branding in others' mind. So, and that may not be the same as what we are trying to create. And we want to a successful organization, a successful campaign would like to minimize the gap between the intended message and the received message. All you saying,
I was going to say yes. I mean, it is critically important, but it can also be very challenging. I mean, we were set up in the 1970s, really, I suppose, at the time when some of the public policy think tanks and the universities and some of the government departments, it was felt, well, there was quite a lot of Marxism in those institutions, and the private sector thought, well, we'd like to have a think tank, not that pushes the private sector, but that at least recognizes the function of the private sector in the mix, together with the public sector as well. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be out there battling for individuals in the private sector, and some people get that confusion. You know, I was asked 10 days ago by the CEO and his staff from one of the largest oil companies if I could have a meeting with him and his team. Yes, and they were, oh, we're really disappointed that you put on this seminar, in which it was basically saying that we, the energy sector, are not paying enough taxes in Papua New Guinea. And you know, this is, you know, as though it was really disloyal. Hang on, we hosted this seminar. We are not, we are not singling you out as the bad guys or anything. But and we've had that before. Sometimes we were doing some work looking at banking spreads, and then suddenly you don't actually get any contributions from the banking sector for the next 24 months or something. You've got to have your worldview, which is like an independent view. We're representing these broad positions, but we're not representing the interests of one company or a little group of companies. You're representing the views that you're trying to make the market more effective, and that you're supporting a better economy for the country to deliver, including taxation, better standards of living for the population. You're supporting the government's constitution, if you like, and the principles of that constitution, and the private sector. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The private ethics for the private sector, ethics for the government. So if you're trying to enhance governance, you've got to hold the private sector to standards of a governance, and the public sector as well. So it's...
So I can sort of summarize this discussion on, especially when we talked about the economic policies and the private role of the private sector. There is a difference between sort of a pro-business think tank and a pro-market think tank. So when you are known, if you are known as a pro-business think tank, that means you are, as Paul was implying, that you are working maybe for individuals' interests, companies' interests, very business-oriented interests, maybe a lobbying organization as well. And that's not a good reputation to have. While at the same time you're talking about the same policies, lesser taxation, let's say, or more open trade. But if you are perceived as a pro-market think tank, then I think it's something of a success. that in which you are saying that no, we are supportive of the role of the private sector, but then we are also talking about competition. So if your think tank, for instance, is working on economic issues, but is not equally active on competition, then you might be perceived as a pro-business think tank as opposed to pro-market think tank. So we should have it. We should have definitely this worldview, our bigger sort of narrative, which then from which derives our research and our opinions, our policy recommendations. But it comes with kind of risks which have been mentioned, sort of 80-20 division which Othman mentioned. But then many of us are not involved in following the consensus. Many of us are involved in moving the consensus. If it's not for moving the consensus, then perhaps the role of the independent think tanks is diluted.
I have
a few months ago, I was surprised when I read the brand used by Pew Research Center. They don't use think tank, but fact tank.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to differentiate think tank from fact tank. If we look at what Pew Research Center does, they just publish surveys and interpret the surveys. I think, yeah, we still need to have a worldview, but we have to be careful in terms of how we translate our normative worldview to the research. I often find that a research by a think tank that just try to give a legitimation for their ideology. So they make a relation between two variables that just to legitimate the ideologies. So I think public policy is the safest term. I think that what we use in Paramarina. Just to we just talk about public policy. When we do a research, we find the evidence. Just let evidence talk, and
we will definitely going to talk more about the role of research. I'll not right now go into it, but I think we talk about more role of research and advocacy, how the two influences each other, and we'll come back to this very important point of what is the danger of having the worldview which you just described. Same goes to set of values. I'll skip some of these discussion and how this then influence our positioning as well as the research think tanks. I think this was exactly what the point you were mentioning, right? How can we minimize the risk of selling an ideology and not selling a policy option if we are known as just associated with one ideology? And the answer to this is what kind of research we are doing. What is the evidence do we have for it?
Sorry, to interrupt. A question maybe for our Cambodian or Vietnamese friends here. When there is only one party, similar in Malaysia until the election about a year ago, to have an ideology that isn't aligned with the ruling party is guaranteeing you're going to have no influence. Because if you're how Ideas originally was sort of an opposition think tank for years. Well, when there's only one party, and unlike in other countries where parties come and go, one party wins this year, the other party will win next year, you can't be viewed as an opposition think tank because then you'll have no influence, because the opposition has no influence. There's only one party. How how do you navigate that back home? Of, again, staying true to your position, staying true to your values, while also recognizing that you have to get along with the ruling party, or else you'll have no influence. How do you manage that back home? Sorry to put people on the spot. I'm actually just curious as to how you try to navigate that.
This is a question to our Cambodian and Vietnamese friends.
Or any, I can't put people on the spot, but it's just everyone knows that in some countries there's only one political party. I mean, in Indonesia there are competitive elections, and it was just until about 1 year ago, Malaysia really only had one political party. Singapore only really has one. So if you're an opposition think tank, it just means you'll be ignored. So how do you stay true to your position? You stay true to your values. Is it a matter of you just pick your battles? And so if there are occasions where you disagree with the government, you maybe don't fight that fight. I'm curious as to how you do that.
Please.
I can share some experience, some of my observations actually. Yeah, it's very tough question, especially in Vietnam, But we don't try to be an opposition think tank, but an independent first think tank who can provide objective and independent thoughts and assessment on policy or economic performance of the nationwide. So when we based on the media network to widespread our ideas, our thoughts to public. So for one party ruling society, there hard parts that you cannot violate. When you jump into this, you'll be like, yes. But there are also soft parts that you can involve in some ways, and try to enter in these soft parts. We don't criticize the policy or the laws. We don't say that, oh, this law is wrong. You do it very not well. It's not good. We don't say that, but we show to public, to policymakers that the influence, the impact, the negative impacts of the law, of this law, or of this policy, of this regulation on the society or on economy. To show them the negative impacts and to give recommendations and advices how to improve it, how to change it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
it's what we
thank you for that. I think this is an important point about the picking up the right battles. And if I can share what Ideas has been doing in, especially in the last few years before the change of the government, is that at practical level, when we talk to the cabinet ministers or members of the political party, we realize that each of them does have an individual personality and may not be perfectly aligned with this one monolithic interpretation. And so, for instance, when we were working on issues of corruption or institutional reforms, even at that time we were able to find out receptive voices within the government. It's not a black and white thing, right? So it's not that everything which one particular government had was evil and everything which the new government has is all good. It's nowhere like that. So we do not only pick up battles as you just described, but we also see who are the people on the ground and who will be more receptive to kind of the views which we are having. And I think these are often the choices and options available, but then it is often dependent on this overlapping between what you want to do and what is the external environment out there, which then helps you creating that positioning. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple of slides here. We have discussed about the spectrum on ideologies. I'm not going to go into it. We've talked about examples, but just to sort of summarize the process, I would say, sort of how to maximize our mind share and how to improve our positioning at a more practical level. I would say that some of these steps can be helpful. So scanning of external environment can be done from looking at the media statements, can be looked at what politicians are saying, what are their positions, and then picking up points of alignment where you agree and disagree. So here, of course, I'm saying that where you find an alignment between what you believe needs to be done and the points of reception which are available at the policy level. Also, it's important to review your media statement and your research output so that there is coherence between your desired level of perception and positioning and your products. So research and media are speaking the same language. That leads to development of an internal coherence before you can communicate to the outside world. And then get feedback. Getting feedback from the members of the public, getting feedback from the members of the media, members of the government is extremely important. Once you're out there, you do not know what is the message being received by the recipients. That's never easy. And so therefore, what kind of language you're using, what kind of words you are putting in the statements, what tool or what medium you're using in communicating that message is very important to minimize the gap between what you want to say and what is being perceived. I think that is something which is a process which every think tank does experience. Yes, please.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it'd be fascinating to hear from different people
Yeah.
what they think, what their current feedback is, whether they think that they are influencing like government policy or public perceptions, and especially in those countries where the policy environment is the most difficult. I mean, that's probably everywhere, but but especially those where, as you say, you've got a one-party rule and there's less sympathy for constructive or any other form of criticism.
We're also running a bit on out of time, but any quick responses which can help this discussion, your experiences in and your perception about influence.
I have a related question and to the group as well about influence in relation to. I would like to find out also from the think tank partners in relation to influence. How do you comprehend or study or understand your stakeholders? Like, do you do a regular mapping exercise on who your stakeholders are? How relevant you stakeholders in reference to leveraging your work or getting some sense of approval or influence in the work that you're doing? And I think that's an important traction as far as positioning is concerned, is understanding your stakeholders and how to a certain degree they could impact on the kind of work that you'd like to showcase or kind of work you'd like to do. So I'd like to add that as well in the discussion.
Yeah. How often do you do stakeholder mapping as a policy think tank, or as a educational think tank?
I think for us it's not really a service stakeholder mapping, but when we do a research project or conduct any research paper or research project, we normally identify who are our audience and who are our key stakeholders that we can communicate or we can cooperate during the process of the research.
Okay.
And then sometimes we can get their input, their support, and also to see their interest if our like research finding or paper can contribute, because for us CPS Center for Policy Study, our target is to use our research paper finding to influence some of the policy making. And normally like talking to related to the positioning, I think for us it's a bit like reversal, because our research project and our message and activity decide influence the way of thinking or perception of others. Like when we work with the government, some related ministry, they always, we don't need to tell them that who we are, but during the research project of operation process, they always see us as a policy research institute who use the evidence to inject to the policy making process of certain government ministry. And sometimes we can do it, sometimes it takes time. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for your very helpful contribution.